Why do victims stay in abusive relationships? Why do victims go back to their abusers? Okay, it can be devastating to see a loved one in an unsafe relationship. It can also be difficult for an outsider to understand why a victim of domestic and family violence doesn't leave the relationship. Abusive relationships can be complicated, especially if kids are involved. It's not always safe for a victim to leave their abuser. In fact, the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic abuse is right after they've left their abuser. They can put themselves and their children at serious risk. It can take a lot of time, planning, support, and courage for someone to escape an abusive relationship. And even if someone does choose to leave, there's a chance they may return. On average, it takes someone 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship before they get out for good. It is important to keep this in mind if you are upset with yourself for returning, or if you are becoming frustrated with the quote-unquote back and forth of someone you know who is living with abuse. With continued patience and support, the victim may grow more confident in their decision to leave. Okay? There are many reasons why someone might stay in an abusive relationship, such as 1, they may be embarrassed or ashamed to tell friends and family about the abuse. Another reason why someone might stay, they and their children may depend on their partner financially. Or they may have a disability and depend on their partner physically. They may be afraid of coping on their own. They may blame themselves for the abuse. Another reason someone might stay, they may have damaged self-worth and think they deserve the abuse. They may have grown up witnessing abuse and thinking it's normal. They may have emotional ties to the abuser and hope the abuser will change. Another interesting reason why someone might stay, they may be worried about where they and their kids will live. Or they may not know their legal rights. They may be worried about child custody arrangements. They may want their children to grow up with both parents. They may be receiving pressure from their family or community to stay in the relationship. They may not know about the available support and resources that can help. They may be afraid their abuser will become violent toward them, their kids, or their pets if they try to leave. These are just some of the reasons someone might stay in an abusive relationship. It's important to remember that it's not always safe for someone to leave their abuser. If you know someone living with domestic violence, avoid passing judgment or pressuring them to leave. You can provide support by letting them know you are there for them, checking in on them regularly, and offering a safe place for them to stay if they do choose to leave. Okay? Now, I had just discussed why do victims go back to their abusers. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and discuss why it is so difficult to leave. All too often, the question, why do people stay in abusive relationships, is posed to survivors, implying that they are to blame for the abuse. Instead, questions like, how did the person causing harm prevent their partner from leaving? Or why do perpetrators of abuse hurt the person they claim to love? These are more appropriate questions. Now, there are serious factors that weigh on the survivor's decision to leave. The first factor weighing on a survivor's decision to leave is leaving can be dangerous. Many people experiencing intimate partner violence realistically fear that their abusive partner's actions will become more violent and even lethal if they attempt to leave. The abuser may have threatened to kill them or hurt their child, family member, or pet if they leave. Okay, another factor why that would affect a survivor's decision to leave. What about the kids? Many survivors are not sure that leaving would be the best for their children, especially if the children are not being abused directly. Concerns may include, will my partner win custody of the children? How will I support my kids without my partner's income? I want my children to have 2 parents. Okay, another serious factor is isolation. The survivor's friends and family may not know about the abuse or may not support their leaving, or the survivor may have no one to turn to since isolation is a key dynamic of intimate partner violence. Another factor that might weigh on a survivor's decision to leave is the cycle of violence and hope for change. Most abusive partners exhibit a behavioral pattern that has been described as a cycle of violence. The cycle of violence has 3 phases. The honeymoon phase, that's when everything in a relationship seems lovely. Then there's the tension building and violent incident. Many abusive partners become remorseful after inflicting violence and promise that they will change, beginning the honeymoon phase again. This cycle makes it difficult to break free from an abusive partner. Okay, another factor that would weigh on a victim's decision to leave is lack of resources. The survivor may not have their own source of income due to financial abuse or may not have access to alternate housing, cash, or bank accounts. Another factor is institutional responses. For example, the clergy and secular counselors are often trained to see only the goal of saving the marriage at all costs rather than the goal of stopping the violence. Police officers do not consistently provide support to survivors. They may treat violence as a domestic dispute instead of a crime where one person is attacking another person. Another institutional response. Despite the issuing of a restraining order, there is little to prevent a released abusive partner from returning and repeating the assault. And lack of affordable safe housing and limited number of emergency shelter beds for survivors of domestic violence may mean that there might not be any place to go. Okay, those were institutional barriers. Now let's look at some social barriers. Some survivors may not believe divorce is a viable alternative for social reasons. Some survivors are socialized to believe that they are responsible for making their marriage work or for keeping the family together. In some cultures, leaving your partner is a disgraceful and reprehensible action. Another social barrier, having a disability. A person with a physical disability is 5 times more likely than a person without a disability to be abused by a partner, spouse, or someone considered to be part of their household. Okay, those were social barriers. Now let's talk about immigration status. Survivors who have immigrated to the U.S. face additional barriers such as fear of deportation, being separated from their children who are born in the U.S., language barriers, and threats of harm to family members in their home country. Remember, leaving is a process. Survivors may leave and return several times before permanently separating from their abusive partner. In fact, research shows that it can take approximately 7 attempts before a survivor permanently leaves an abusive partner. Okay, citation, womenagainstabuse.org/education-